A crotchety old grandfatherly figure, William Hartnell described his doctor as a cross between Father Christmas and the Wizard of Oz. He had a lot of great stories throughout his era, which is why I had a really hard time picking 5 of the best. Also, there's no particular order because I couldn't really decide which one was the best, and it's only stories from his era, so nothing from the Three Doctors, Five Doctors, or Twice Upon a Time or anything like that. So here we go, without further ado, the top 5 stories from the William Hartnell era of Doctor Who. Up first, The Reign of Terror. I don't know why, but I really like this story. It's one of my favorite of the pure historicals. I think it often gets overlooked for the more popular ones like Marco Polo or the Aztecs, which I can see why people prefer those, but I don't know, I just have a lot of fun with this one. You'd think a story set around the French Revolution era with a name like Reign of Terror would be one of the more horrific serials of the show, and yes, there is danger in some darker moments, but they also manage to keep it relatively light and have a bit of fun, especially with the first Doctor, who I think really gets a chance to shine in this story. He's separated from the rest of the team in the beginning, and there are kind of fun scenes of his adventures exploring the countryside, culminating in forming a disguise to break Susan and Barbara from prison. The main plot of this story, however, revolves around our main characters getting caught in the middle of political espionage related to Napoleon and the French Revolution. There's spying, disguises, and a few twists and turns here and there. All in all, I think it's a very enjoyable story. I'll be honest, it was a tough choice between this and the Romans, but I think I'll choose this one. Unfortunately, 2 episodes of this are missing, but fortunately, it is one of those stories that has had its missing episodes animated, so it can be viewed in full, or at least as close to full as we can get. Up next, the Daleks' Master Plan. Unless you count the Trial of a Time Lord as one story, then the Daleks' Master Plan is the longest serial in the history of Doctor Who. If you do count the Trial of a Time Lord as one story, then I guess it would be the second longest. You would think that this being a classic series, that would mean padding after padding after padding. And I guess there's some, but I personally don't see that as the case here as much as you would think. The story moves around to a lot of different locations, so it doesn't become boring. It can be quite dark as well, and spoilers if you haven't seen it, it's the first of, and one of the few stories to feature a companion death. 2 if you count Sarah Kingdom as a companion. Now, of course, these characters don't travel in the TARDIS long before it happens, but in both cases, it's still quite tragic, especially poor Katerina. I won't give away what happens if you haven't seen this story yet, but I imagine it must have been quite shocking when it was originally shown. This is another one that's mostly missing with only 3 episodes remaining. There are, however, still ways to view it. There's telesnap reconstructions and the audio soundtrack with linking narration. Whichever method you choose, I think this story is definitely worth a look. Up next, The Time Meddler. This story is just a lot of fun. The plot and danger seem on a much smaller scale compared to other stories, but underneath lies the huge bombshell of introducing another time traveler with a TARDIS, something the show hadn't done yet. Peter Butterworth is great as the bumbling, meddling monk, and he and Hartnell are a pleasure to watch as they banter and battle back and forth. This story, of course, also introduces Stephen Taylor as a companion, played by Peter Purvis, after they had met him first in the previous story, The Chase. He and Vicky work really well together as a companion duo, and there are some pretty amusing scenes in the beginning where they have to convince Stephen that he has actually traveled in time. I wish we'd seen more of the monk in the TV show beyond his short appearance in the Daleks' Master Plan, and I know he's been in Big Finish, but from what little I've heard of that has just been okay. They never really seem to capture his character for me. But maybe I just need to listen to more. Maybe I haven't listened to the right ones. Do you guys have any Big Finish recommendations starring the monk? Anyway, this is a great story, and I still hold out improbable hope that we will once again see the monk in the TV series. Up next, the Dalek Invasion of Earth. After the unexpectedly great response to the Daleks after their introduction in the second story of Season 1, the logical thing for the showrunners to do, of course, was to, well, bring them back. This was the first time they attempted a villain return in the show, and I, for one, think it was a very successful attempt. Bringing them to Earth was, in my opinion, a stroke of genius. The idea may seem commonplace to us now, but at the time it was not only the return of the Daleks, but also the first time we'd seen an alien invasion on Earth. I can only imagine how much of an adrenaline rush it must have been at the time for kids to see Daleks strolling down well-known London landmarks. Again, it's not as unusual to see that sort of thing now, For goodness sakes, we get it almost every season. But it's still a rather exciting story with a somewhat faster pace than we're used to seeing in this era. Unfortunately, the ending does fall a little flat for me. I'm not sure why, there's just something about it that seems a little too quick, a little too easy. This story also features the first companion departure, with Carol Ann Ford having made the decision to leave the part of the Doctor's granddaughter Susan. While it's not a perfect departure, I do think it's handled decently for the first one, but it's still better than a lot of the companion exits we would see in the future in the classic series. Speaking of horrible companion exits, next up, the War Machines. The War Machines is an interesting anomaly in the Hartnell era. It's the first story to take place entirely on contemporary Earth. As such, it feels fresh and unique from the rest of Hartnell Stories. Sometimes us fans like to play nerdy games, and one thing I've heard people discuss on podcasts and forums is what certain stories would be like if other Doctors were plopped into them. And this one kind of feels like Hartnell was plopped into a Pertwee story. The way it handles the introduction of new companions Ben and Polly also feels better and more modern, at least compared to how it handled some of the last few introductions in the past, such as exiting companion Dodo's ridiculous entrance in the massacre. Speaking of Dodo, I think her exit here is even more ridiculous than that entrance, and is probably one of the worst departures in the show history. Although, as I said in my Sontaran ranking video, at least it's not as bad as Leela's. And I happen to think after that, you can't get worse than Mel. All in all, this is a very exciting and enjoyable story. The episode 3 cliffhanger is one of my favorite moments in all of Who. If you haven't checked the story out yet, I would definitely recommend you do so. So what did you think of my list? What are your favorite Hartnell stories? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.